Welcome, low ego action heroes and phoenixes. I'm Debbie Levitt from dcx, and welcome to episode 280. We're going to talk about having boundaries with difficult family. It might apply to friends, but we're really going to be focusing on family. And setting boundaries with toxic or difficult family can be so difficult because even when you feel strong enough to start drawing those lines and pushing forward with that, somebody, a well-meaning friend or a not well-meaning friend, usually gives you their opinion. Hey, family is everything. And hey, you've only got one mother or father or whoever it is. Or, oh, you shouldn't air your dirty laundry. Or, hey, you're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal. And then we feel like, oh, gosh, maybe we're not right for creating those boundaries. But we've got to remember that blood doesn't give anybody the right to hurt us, and boundaries aren't betrayal, they're survival. Boundaries tell others the parameters for having a relationship with you, and it's not just a middle finger to tell people to take a hike. It's how we stay safe, especially where there are toxic family members. So before we introduce today's guest, he's been here before. Everybody has a favorite. He's one of mine. So I just want to remind everybody to please subscribe to us, whether you're following us on Twitch or YouTube. We're now going to be broadcasting these as audio on your favorite podcast platform. So look for dcx Hive everywhere you go. Of course, join our free Discord community and our free Patreon, and check out the events we have coming up. I've just planned all of January, February, and March with lots more live streams and topics. So let's bring in Dr. Seth Finkle, who's been a guest before. Seth, tell us about you.
It's me, everybody's favorite toxic family member. I am a clinical and school psychologist, still working in a public school district and teaching at a university out here in beautiful, totally frozen, solid Lehigh Valley, Eastern Pennsylvania in the United States. And it's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and helping people out with these topics. I'm sure after the holiday dinners people have had, because we're talking on December 30th, 2025, after the holiday dinners some people had, they might be wondering, why bother having boundaries? Seth, why bother?
Right. I mean, I think after some of the family dinners people have had, I think it's abundantly clear why to bother. It's holidays tend to bring out, if we're lucky, the best, but often the worst in people. People are feeling comfortable and free to be abundantly themselves, and that is the whole package. And so, yeah, I think it becomes very clear when you're kind of you're sort of cordoned off with a bunch of people that you can't feel like you can reasonably escape from, and all of a sudden you have to act nice and take what they're serving, literally and figuratively, and you don't feel like there's a way out other than to go text in the bathroom. It's really easy to feel kind of stuck, and it brings up all kinds of feelings of warm and friendly.
Or that was two of my dogs fighting. So just an audio representation of some people's holiday family dinners.
That's perfect. That's my signal to shut up, and we'll move on to the next thing. But yeah, holidays can be tough, and families can be tough, and that's why we're here to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that very often a lot of people imagine, oh, it's just my family. They're just weird, or gosh, it must just be my mom. I'm sure other people don't go through things like that. And I think that we end up isolating ourselves further when we imagine that we're the only people on the planet going through this, or maybe our family's not really dysfunctional, they're just weird. How can we tell if our family might fall into the category of dysfunctional?
Right. I mean, there's a lot of clear flashing red lights. If you've got family members who have significant addiction or other kinds of obviously problematic behaviors that are impacting the family, that's a clear indication. If there's obvious abuse in the family, that's a clear indication. Those are things that you don't need, a psychologist to tell you. But it can be much more subtle. And frankly, I would argue nearly every family has issues of one type or another. So families that have trouble communicating, which, by the way, is every family, because communication is hard, language is imperfect. And so when those problems become a source of conflict, or not just disagreement, but hostility within the family or resentment, I think that's a pretty clear indication. When there's breaches of trust happening, people who are spreading all kinds of gossip, sharing things that aren't their story to share, emotional distancing happening in the family where people are not feeling comfortable together, they're feeling sort of cut off and separate. A really clear indication that you might be dealing with some difficulties in a family are controlling kinds of behaviors or overt manipulation, when you have one or more family members who are attempting to kind of change the dynamics and influence people in ways that clearly feel uncomfortable and inappropriate. All of those would be indications that we're dealing with some difficult family dynamics. But suffice it to say, there's no such thing as a dysfunctional family. Every family has things that function well. Sometimes you have to search hard for them, but they're there. Every family has dysfunction. Really talking about a kind of continuum for the most part.
Apologies to people on Twitch. It accidentally says this is a karaoke stream because I forgot to update that. So
we could make it that.
Yeah, you and I could, since we both got degrees in music from the same university together. So apologies to the people on Twitch. It accidentally says holiday songs. Let me double check this for a moment. No, it says no holiday songs from the other day when I sang. The title is correct. The go live notification is incorrect. So let me try this again. So anyway, sorry about that. I always forget because I have to update Twitch separately. I always forget that. And I want to add to what you were saying about difficult or dysfunctional or manipulative families. I know we've had some people in our online community over in the Discord talk about parents and family members who nothing ever seems to be good enough for them, or nothing ever seems to be right for them. Hi, Ana Lucia. Surprised to see you on YouTube. Nothing ever seems to be right for them. If they're looking for a job and they haven't found one yet, they must be doing something wrong. They're a loser. They're getting it wrong. You should take my advice. Would you say some of these types of things fall into some of those toxic areas or difficult areas?
Sure. Yeah. And again, toxicity is a term that gets kind of bandied about a lot these days. And frankly, it's sort of much like a lot of other things. You kind of know it when you see it. There is no clear sort of demarcation of what's toxic and what's just a normal variation. Arguably, if you're sitting at a family dinner and you feel like you're being berated about your weight, your marital status, your employability, your life choices, your hair
gender,
color, whatever, all of the things, nowadays there's all kinds of discussions about politics. All of these things can become uncomfortable. And when they're uncomfortable and you're sitting in a situation where you should be relaxing and enjoying the company of family or friends, and instead it feels like either an interrogation or a judgment fest or something that just feels uncomfortable, it is what it is. I mean, that's whether we choose to call it toxic or whether we just choose to call it a really bad day. It's no fun, and it's not inevitable. You have choices, and I guess that's the takeaway that we're going to talk about today. Is you don't have to put up with that. You're allowed to make some choices about your own comfort and safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like something that occurred to me thinking about this holiday season, and especially with a lot of people disagreeing more about politics or the world or whatever it might be, possibly more than they have disagreed before, is if you know that is going to be difficult, if you know that these people don't see things the way you do, and if you know that they're likely to bring it up or poke you about it, you don't have to go to that dinner. Now, if you live with them, it might be hard to not be there. You're going to have to make something up. But I think people forget that they don't have to go to a family event. And I wonder if they can ask themselves kind of future questions like, hey, in January, when you're looking back at Hanukkah or Christmas or whatever it was, will you be happy you went to the family dinner? Will future you be glad you did it? Will you be looking forward to next year's family dinner? Seth, are there some other things that we can think about in the moment that might help us decide whether or not we do want to go to these events? And either honestly telling people why or magically waking up with the flu that day?
Sure. Yeah, I think before I do that, I mean, suffice it to say, it doesn't have to be a binary either or operation. I mean, you can make choices for yourself that obviously you either go or you don't go. But if you choose to go, how you handle yourself and how you set limits and boundaries and approach that, both preparation wise and also kind of how you conduct yourself while you're there, can make a huge difference in terms of how it plays out. And I know for a lot of people, we're thinking, well, it's not my behavior I'm worried about. It's grandma, it's dad, it's, brother-in-law, whatever. And that's true. But since we can't directly influence their behavior, we can indirectly influence it by how we conduct ourselves and kind of what we decide for ourselves before we go into that situation. So you can go into it without having to be a punching bag or feel like you have to just take whatever is being given to you. On the other hand, you can absolutely choose to say, no thanks, I'm not going. And how you do that gives you a variety of options as well. You can absolutely make choices about, you know what, I don't really feel like going and I'm just going to give an excuse. I'm not feeling well. Or you can say, I'm not going and not give any reason. Or you could go and you can be very direct about, I'm not going because I'm uncomfortable about this. And this has happened the last 2 or 3 times. And as long as you own it, I'm not comfortable in this situation. Generally framing it in the form of an I is a good way to do it. So you can opt in or out. But I would say, again, that opens up a huge continuum of questions for yourself about, do you want to go, do you not want to go? And once you've answered that, it's a question of how do you want to approach the going or the not going?
And there's also this kind of third option, which is you go, but you have ready some way to leave early or get out, or so that you're not just hiding in the bathroom texting, but maybe you have something prepared that you can say if things get ugly and you decide you want to go, especially if they're making you the victim or you feel like the victim. It can be okay to leave the house, to walk around the block, or leave the house and not come back. I really want people to feel like they have options, and I want people to feel like they have permission to take care of themselves and put their oxygen masks on.
Absolutely. Suffice it to say, I've been personally in that situation several times over the course of my life, where I've been at a family event usually, although it's not always family, and I've had to make some choices about how do I want to handle it. And sometimes before I lose it completely, taking a short walk is really helpful. Right now, if I did that, I'd probably freeze to death outside. But you can take a moment. You can find a quiet corner. I've done this in events without family where there's friends, and frankly, it's just there's nothing toxic. It's just a little too overstimulating for me. So I found a quiet room to sit and unwind for a second. Again, with you definitely have options. But as I'm sort of peripherally seeing in some of our comments, I will say one of the best things you can possibly do in advance of an event that could potentially be difficult, or even just a conversation with someone on the phone that could be difficult, just coming up with some terms for how you want things to be, and explicitly stating those, that is incredibly liberating. And it really does give people the sense that, oh my gosh, I actually have some control over what seemed like a totally uncontrollable situation.
Oh gosh, yeah. So Ana Lucia is putting up some comments about some of the good and bad interactions she's had with her mom and godmother lately, and yeah, obviously there are some people who are mean. There are some people who don't have boundaries, and they go up to people and say, "You're fat," or "You're this and you're that," and yeah, they're very difficult. In Ana Lucia's case, she's mentioned that she has some medical conditions that have affected her weight and other things, and people can choose to be sensitive about that, or they can choose to be insensitive about that. And I think while we reflect on our own choices, I also want to remind people that the others that we are at these events and meals with, they're making choices too. They're making choices to bring up topics they know might be controversial or create discord, no pun intended. They're making choices as well. And I don't know about, I mean, Seth, you can take a different perspective, but I tend to feel like these aren't mistakes. I tend to feel like in many cases these topics are brought up deliberately, and that these are choices people are making to create a certain environment. Can you help me out here?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's true sometimes. I mean, I know that's true sometimes. I don't have to say I think. It's clearly true sometimes. There's some people who are doing something as a power move, or to be dismissive of someone, or because of their own sort of damage and their own sort of ego needs and things like that. I mean, that's absolutely true. That in some cases it's clearly conscious and intentional. And I also believe there are times where people are enacting their own history, their own issues, their own trauma, and they're doing it in ways that they may or may not consciously believe that they're actually harming other people. I don't know that it's always an intent to hurt someone, but I think it would be disingenuous to say that if they gave it a minute's thought, they would clearly realize it's going to hurt someone. I mean, there are certain things that it's interesting. Like, if you just met someone, unless you really had trouble with social skills and reading the room, and that's also true for some folks, but if you just met someone, then you're an average person in our society and you're reasonably neurotypical, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to suddenly make a comment about their weight, or about the way they're dressed, or about something that's completely rude.
Right. Nice to meet you. You're fat and you look like crap.
Right. Like, why would you do that? And yet, within family contexts, even more so than friends, although friends will do it too, but family in particular seems to feel like they've got carte blanche to just go at it and give people the most uncomfortable things they can possibly say. And then sometimes afterwards, and Debbie, you and I have talked about this a bit,
for decades,
you'll get the oh no, you're just being sensitive about it. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I was just being funny, or
sure,
I'm just saying the truth. I'm just pointing it out, or I'm worried about their health, or about. And suddenly it goes from being a clearly antagonistic statement, whether it was intentional or not, to someone trying to backpedal and kind of reverse the whole thread so they don't have to take responsibility for their words. And that's
right, which sometimes comes with gaslighting. Sometimes comes with the gaslighting of, well, you're just being sensitive, or you can't take a joke. So first, you're fat and ugly and can't get a job and whatever they want to pick on you about. And on top of that, you have no sense of humor and you're too sensitive. And it always amazes me, like, especially if this happens around Hanukkah or Christmas, these are supposed to be some of the holiest days of the year, where we're supposed to be thinking about God and religion and hopefully the love and positivity of whatever religion someone believes in. And yet these people are putting these behaviors on display.
Right. And one of the hardest things, I think, for people to recognize is that other people have their own their own trauma, their own backstory. And while that doesn't excuse their behaviors, it can sometimes explain it. And I think one of the ultimate goals, and it's probably too hard initially to do, but one of the ultimate goals is to reach a place where you can accept that person for who they are. You don't have to like them. You don't even have to interact with them, but you can acknowledge this is who they are. And I accept that this is who they are. And at the moment, they don't seem motivated to change. And so I'm going to make some choices about how I interact or don't interact with them to make sure that I'm okay.
Yeah, I think that's one of the many realizations that helped me many years ago when I was in therapy related to family lack of harmony, family cacophony, and that was for me to realize that some of the more abusive people in my family, I had to finally realize this is their best. They are doing their best. It doesn't meet my standards. I don't want to interact with these people. I'm rarely having a positive experience with them, but I believe this is who they are and they are doing their best. And it's unlikely to get better, especially since they're happy with themselves and they don't want to change. And so I think some of those realizations can help people find their sea legs a bit with the people around them.
Exactly. And I think it's always a struggle to try to figure out, well, I don't want to say always, it's often a struggle. Sometimes it's very clear cut. Sometimes you think to yourself, this person is abusive and their behavior is erratic. They are either severely addicted or they are just ingrained in this pattern of really kind of hostile or abusive or negative behavior that just is uncalled for and makes me uncomfortable. Um, in which case, it can be pretty easy to say, I'm going no contact with this person because I can't handle it and I don't want to handle it and I have a right to not feel like that. In many cases, though, it's more complicated. And I think, what we're seeing in, for example, Ana Lucia's situation is that it can be a kind of ongoing push-pull situation where some days are good and some days are not good. Some interactions feel okay with some people, and then there's going to be difficult times where people are going to step over lines. It's a question for each individual person about how much they can ignore, how much they personalize, how much affects them emotionally, and how much they can sort of let, like Teflon, just kind of slide off. Um, and that will vary over time as relationships kind of mature. Things are very different when you're, say, 15 than when you're, say, 65 with a difficult family member or a difficult friend. Your ability to, I don't want to use the word tolerate because that almost sounds like you're just putting up with, but to accept and to not personalize certain kinds of things. You don't take it in, it doesn't affect you in a dramatic way. That can change as we get older, as we mature, as we learn coping strategies and we manage ourselves differently. So it's an ongoing moving target in terms of, do I need to cut this person off right now? Can I engage with this person on a limited basis? Can I be around this person all the time, but modify the way I'm responding to them or reacting to them internally and externally?
Yeah, I mean, it's a spectrum. It's a number line. It's not a binary. It's not either I hang out with these people constantly, unless you're living with them, or I never speak to them again for the rest of my life. There are ways to try to take breaks or get a little bit of time off from some of these relationships. And I think that brings us back to the idea of you trying to set boundaries with people once you can get to that point where you've decided, I need a short break, I need a long break, or I need this type of, I'll talk to them on the phone, but I won't go see them. Like everybody might decide their own boundaries. So how can we kind of get there with ourselves? Because it's mostly between us and us.
It is, yeah. I mean, those are the only people we have direct control over are us.
Right.
And even then, sometimes it's more indirect, but we have the best chance of having direct control over ourselves. So yeah, the boundaries we set are as much about our own behavior as anybody else's behavior, because other people will sometimes blow right past those boundaries we're trying to set. And that's especially true. It's these are issues that are universal for what it's worth. It's not, again, we should just continue to reinforce this. This is not something that says my family is messed up. I have, everyone's family has issues. Every relationship has potential issues, and those things are normal. Where it becomes even more problematic and even more critical, but frankly just much harder to set and enforce, are when you're talking about codependency issues with people, when you're talking about narcissism, when you're talking about active addiction. These things essentially make it that much harder to maintain boundaries with folks. But if we start off in the basic, most straightforward level, it starts with trying to figure out what you need.
Right.
Frankly, the first thing is to take assessment of what it is that's problematic about this for you and what it is that's rewarding for you. Because obviously, if you're choosing to continue to set boundaries and maintain some connection at all, I mean, the easiest boundary to set in some ways is the most definitive. It's the no contact boundary. I'm not going to respond to them. I'm going to block their number. We're never going to speak again. Even that's not super easy. You can have the family send in their winged monkeys, and all of a sudden you've got some contact that you didn't choose to have. But if we take that out of the mix, if you're setting boundaries and maintaining any contact at all, there's obviously something that you're getting from that. So figuring out for yourself what you want from the relationship and what you don't want from the relationship, that's the first step, and probably the hardest part. Because once you've done that, the rest of it is really a matter of just implementation.
Yeah, and the implementation is tough, and I think a lot of people feel unsure about it, like especially since and so Seth, we can get personal here because a lot of people know that in 2 weeks I will be celebrating 19 years without my blood family. I threw
Yes.
them out in early 2007, and we're coming up on 2026. So I am celebrating that. And I went no contact with multiple people, which was my choice. And I'd previously done pockets and periods of no contact and then getting back into contact, but always found that no matter what I did or didn't do, I was standing in front of a target with abuse arrows flying at me, and I just decided that I had had enough and that there weren't enough positive times to feel like this balanced out. So I recognize that I'm kind of the end of the bell curve as usual, but even in that required some very clear communication, and they've only disrespected it once in 19 years, and so I feel lucky so far that I've been able to accomplish my goal of having no contact with these people. But probably a lot of this starts with being clear about your feelings, your needs, and what's going to best save you, because nobody's going to come rescue you. You might have to rescue yourself.
That's exactly right. And just quickly to kind of double back and to validate you and or anybody else who's watching or listening to this, I'm not so sure you're at the very end of the bell curve at all. I actually think you're probably much closer to the bump in the middle than you would think. Because I think there's a lot of folks who have cut people out of their lives. Sometimes they do it explicitly. Sometimes they just, over time, you hear from them less. They don't interact as much. It's kind of normative, I would argue. In your case, you were, I think, fairly direct and emphatic about it, and your need to do so was pretty clear cut. But I don't think that's unusual at all. I actually think that's probably closer to the norm than you would think. I think if you ask around, ask any 5 people, whether or not they're people in their family that they're cut off from, I think you'll be surprised to find perhaps that probably more than half will say that there's a person. Now, it may or may not be their entire nuclear family, but they will say that there are people in their family that they can't really have ongoing contact with because it's uncomfortable, it's difficult. But yeah, knowing your own feelings, knowing your own needs, and I think just making a choice to value yourself is vitally important, because that's really what you're doing.
standards for how you want to be treated.
Right. And I think it's important to be realistic. And again, this comes back to the idea of knowing these people and knowing what they probably can and can't change about themselves, or will or won't change about themselves. You need to be realistic about what you can expect from them. And that's a big part of setting boundaries is, you can't set a boundary by saying to someone, I want you to be totally different. Like, that's not realistic. That's
right.
not
You
going to
can talk
happen.
to me if.
Right. I'm willing to be with you if you're someone completely different.
Right. Change
not,
for me.
If anyone's ever tried to date someone like that, and we know full well that's an ineffective strategy. It generally does not. I'd love for someone to throw in the comments if they've ever had a situation where they're in any kind of relationship with anyone, and their entire goal was to go full Pygmalion, full My Fair Lady, change them dramatically into someone that they were never before, and they were successful, and everyone lived happily ever after. I think that doesn't happen.
Right.
We need to make realistic choices about how much is enough that it'll feel better for me and I can maintain this, and how much is more than I can reasonably ask of this person.
Right. So thinking about handling some of these difficult family members and trying to create those boundaries in a healthy way, knowing that we might still feel some guilt or fear, but pushing past it, what are some recommendations?
So I think we'll throw some generics out there, but suffice it to say, there's a fairly big pile of possible boundaries that can be set or ways to manage it. And so, but as a quick disclaimer, nothing that we're going to talk about today is a kind of one size fits all. This is very much customized for person to person. Anyone who's ever seen me out here before talking with you knows I put in a plug for working with a good therapist.
Yes.
That can be very helpful. If you can't get a good therapist, some good books are good. Might be able to make a few recommendations today. Or if in an absolute worst case scenario, which isn't the worst, AI makes at least a plausible there's life coaching and other sorts of things. And these are not necessarily the kinds of things that require a clinical psychologist or someone with a master's in social work. You could work with someone who has good life coaching experience, or even a reasonably trained AI with some caveats that there's some risks and benefits to that. But it's not the absolute worst choice. And there are lots of different ways to kind of custom tailor your set of boundaries for what your specific needs are. Every dynamic, every relationship is going to look different. That said,
and hold on, I'm just going to have to, you threw the softball. I'm just going to have to plug myself for a moment. I am now a certified life coach. I expect in Q1 2026 to get my ICF ACC. So, hey, if anybody's interested in a life coach, you can find that the work that I'm doing at dcx.to. Okay, plug. Thank you, Seth. Back to you.
Well done. So here's a couple of straightforward, easy things to recommend. They're not always easy to implement, but they're the sort of the most basic square one kinds of things to throw out there. And one of them is get comfortable with the word no. And it's not just the word, but the concept of no. I immediately have, my name is no, my number is no. You got to let it go. Going through my head right now. So that's kind of the deal. You have to get comfortable with it. And it's not always comfortable. In fact, for a lot of people who are more permissive, more passive, more used to being in the position of your job is to just take it and smile and not rock the boat or make anyone uncomfortable or unhappy. Again, especially true in situations with narcissistic family members who they make everyone uncomfortable and they don't like to feel discomfort themselves. If you're in that situation, learning to draw a line, any line, and say, this is my line, and I'm respecting it, and I'm asking you to respect it, and if you don't, here are the consequences for breaking through my line. That's a fairly straightforward dynamic. It's telling people, I'm going to give you a hard or a soft no, and we can talk about the difference between those. And based on that no, this is my line. And if you choose to ignore that line or disrespect that line, here's what's going to happen. And then you need to do what you said you're going to do. You need to be impeccable with your word, as they say in the 4 agreements. You have to stick to your position on this and not tolerate people testing that limit, or the limit won't last for very long. But I think you also need to be prepared realistically that you're going to get some testing, you're going to get some pushback, and you need to be prepared for that. And so if your consequence is we'll never speak again, you need to be clear about the fact that you need to potentially invoke that. And if that's too harsh, then you need to decide, I'm going to need a little bit of time, I'm going to need a few weeks, or I'm going to need to only talk to you in a public place for a while, or I'm going to set this limit. And again, as you said earlier, it's not to give someone the middle finger. It's to protect yourself. It's to say, I value myself. I value my needs. I value my boundaries and my time. And I'm asking you to do the same. And that's the cost of admission to a relationship with me.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I don't know if you'll remember 1990, but it reminds me of one of the many fights I got into with my biological mother, where I had asked her to please not mention a particular topic. And she called up and left a answering machine message back when we had answering machines, going on and on about that topic. And my response to her was, because I was away at college, and my response was, I don't want to talk to you until I'm stuck coming home and living in your house with you, and we'll have to talk to you. But I think I didn't talk to her for 2 months. This had happened in early February, and whenever I went home for Easter Passover is when I was stuck talking to her again. So it was probably about 2 months, and I followed through on that, and so did she.
Right. And that's important. And I will say the terms of this kind of dynamic often come down to, in terms of deciding, do I or don't I invoke that boundary? Do I or don't I sort of set that limit and invoke that consequence? Largely for a lot of folks, not for everybody, everyone's different on this, but for a lot of people, it comes down to your perception of intent. If you believe that the person you said, let's say I'm someone who's transgender, someone misgenders me, I can choose to take that as a full frontal assault, and it might be. It's quite possible that it's meant to wound me in some way. It's also quite possible that it slipped someone's mind, it's new for them, and they are apologetic, they feel badly about it. And oftentimes you'll know, because most people who are well-intentioned, they become exceedingly apologetic to a point where it's kind of like, it's okay. Like, you don't have to beat yourself up, or this accidents happen. Those are different scenarios, same behavior, different intention. And so I think in the case of the one that you're describing, Debbie, with your biological mother, it was pretty clear this was not a oops. This was I am stepping directly over the line you just drew in the sand, and right. I am smacking you in the face with it. And that's a whole different dynamic than you're having a conversation and it comes up by accident. And so I think everyone has to kind of decide for themselves where the line is, how hard the line is. I mentioned hard and soft no. Is it a no that potentially leaves open the possibility of a yes down the road? For some people, it's, I'm going to maintain my no on this for the moment, but I'm open to the possibility of that changing. Or is it a clear, hard pass where you're like, absolutely not now and not ever. This is never an okay thing. And I'm making that very clear, and I'm setting some clear limits about that.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the what some people go through when they have to take a short or long or temporary or not temporary break from a difficult family member. And there's a lot of grieving there. There's a lot of grief related to sometimes the realization that person is never going to be who I wanted them to be or needed them to be or hoped they would be. Can you talk a little bit about dealing with some of that grief?
Absolutely. Yeah. It is very difficult for a lot of folks. It can really feel like a huge loss. And in many cases, it is a huge loss. It's someone who was previously important in their lives, or someone who holds at least an important symbolic place in their lives, even if the actual person is pretty flawed and they were never able to actually fulfill that role for them. There's the sense of, I'm losing someone important to me. Um, it is really hard. And it brings up a sense of loss and grief. It can also send up a sense of guilt. And families are often quick to pile on that to try to kind of push you into a direction of breaking your own boundaries. So making you feel more guilty about this and questioning yourself. Totally normal set of dynamics that happen. Um, I think in terms of dealing with the grief, it's like dealing with any other loss, really. It's recognizing that that person is not able to be who you need them to be. So it's not radically different from, say, a divorce, a separation, a breakup. It will nearly always have some at least bittersweet component to it. And in many cases, it can feel really painful. The good news about that is, if this is someone that you really feel the need to take a break from or to completely cut ties with entirely, there's a reason. You need to trust your own instincts on this. If you've chosen to do that, that's a pretty strong choice on your part. And if you've done that, the good news is that the feelings of grief and loss are temporary. And the feeling of liberation, of increased value to yourself, of increased self-esteem, increased confidence, just your inner peace, if it's someone you need to walk away from, you're gonna get huge dividends down the road from that. Um, but initially, it can feel pretty lonely. It can feel pretty sad, especially if there's collateral people that you have to sort of take a break from in your life or cut off completely. As you experienced, it can be several people simultaneously that you need to draw a hard line with, and that absolutely. I mean, you can probably speak to that as well as I could at this point. It's, and frankly, probably anybody who's listening who's gone through a breakup from someone in their lives understands there is a period of grieving that happens, and you treat it literally like any other period of grief or loss in your life. It can be very hard.
Yeah, and I also want to say that for me, it was an immediate celebration. There was no grieving. You know, I felt like my first 30 or so years were the grieving, and now it was the relief. And I just want to make sure people understand that whatever your emotional or intellectual response is to a temporary or permanent disconnection from a difficult or toxic person, it's yours. It's your feeling, and you have every right to have it. And it may be celebratory, it may be grief, it may be a combination, or it could be something else. And don't add to the difficulty of the time by trying to judge yourself for how you're feeling and saying, oh, I should be sadder right now, or I should be happier right now. You should just be wherever you are.
Well said. I think some of the hard part for a lot of folks is from basic first principles. It's realizing and acknowledging and really truly accepting deep down on an emotional gut level that they have the right to set boundaries for themselves, that they can give themselves permission to draw those lines and not feel like they're somehow being disloyal, or they're being bad in some way, or they're being selfish or petty, all of the things that we're told when we try to set boundaries. Uh, and then learning to believe it enough that you can follow through with consequences when people try to break that, or to be consistent and not drop off and say, well, I don't know, maybe, and to start sort of waffling and second guessing oneself. That's also normal, and there's nothing terrible about that. It's part of the process for a lot of folks, and learning how to do this is some of that give and take. But you don't have to. It's perfectly okay. Not the slightest, but it's not selfish. It's self-protective.
Yeah,
It's
self-care.
self-loving to draw a line and say, I don't need to take this anymore. If you think of it essentially as somewhere in the spectrum of what can be considered abusive behavior, psychologically abusive, emotionally abusive, or neglectful. Learning to say, I'm stepping away because I respect me, is a perfectly valid thing to do. But it doesn't always feel that way. We're often got that little voice that's stuck in our head that says, you should feel guilt, you should feel bad, you're breaking up the family, you're hurting these other people.
You made
you're
grandma
being
cry.
Right. You're disloyal to the family. You're breaking the family up.
This
You're
isn't what
breaking the
God
family's
wants.
honor. Right. All of the above. And those are things that are weaponized against us when you're trying to set a boundary. And it's very easy in those situations to start saying, well, and people kind of try to, leverage that a little bit. Well, maybe just this once you can let them, it's just this one wedding, or it's just this one. You get to choose. And if that
Right.
one wedding is going to be one wedding too much, you can say that. And if you're willing to say, I can do this, but only on these terms, that is okay too. And you can put that out there. And if people blow through those terms and say, no, I'm going to go right for the sore spot in that situation, have a plan. Be prepared to take a walk or take a ride back home or whatever you need to do in that situation. And if you don't want to hear what the fallout looks like or the pushback looks like after that, have a plan to block that out as well.
Yeah, and I also want to remind people that sometimes, even if you just say to someone, hey, I need a few weeks away from this. I'm not coming home for Christmas. I'm going to stay where I am right now and hang out with my friends. I'm not coming home or whatever. We also need to kind of strengthen ourselves and be prepared for the uninvolved people who are going to give us their opinions. There might be friends or other family members or coworkers or somebody who says, how can you do that? Christmas is a time for family. Or let's say, like when I cut my family out, I got, for a few years, I got a lot of, but I'm sure your mother loves you. She must miss you. And, I just would say to people, thank you for your concern, but this decision was made deliberately. It's best for everybody, and let's talk about something else. And most people heard that boundary and accepted it and didn't say anything else. I could just say this decision was made deliberately, and this is a relationship that just does not work. And I know more about this than you do, but thank you anyway. And typically when I ended with, and I know more about this situation than you do, people really ran out of things to say because they couldn't be like, no, I'm sure your mother, and I'd be like, are you?
Right. I want to throw this out because I know that the people who often are watching and listening to your feeds are people who are in fact low ego action heroes, and many of us tend to be people who, as a result of that, are fairly accepting and fairly empathic and compassionate. And I think it's easy for some of us to get roped into the family dynamic of being the enabler, which is kind of interesting. So
Or the people
sometimes
pleaser.
we find ourselves the people pleaser, right? And one of the things that can easily happen is there's the family myth, the fairy tale, the what I'll sometimes call the we don't talk about Bruno effect, where there's someone in the family who is pegged as the black sheep, the one that we don't talk to, and oftentimes there's some family dynamics that led up to that are also fairly unhealthy and toxic. Sometimes that person is deeply troubled and has their own difficulties, and so it may be wise to set boundaries with that person for your own self. But sometimes we fall into great uncle so and so, we don't talk to him because, and the because, if you really get down to it, is because aunt so and so generations before me had this split in the family over something, and that disagreement became, we don't talk to those people anymore. And that's fine, but that's also enabling behavior. And the fact of the matter is, one of the things that we can do is not spread some of that gossip, to give people the opportunity to actually have a real relationship with us and see what that's like. And if that's not okay, you can set boundaries and choose to reverse that. But just because the family rules or the family story say we don't talk to that person or those people, that could be part of the problem. That could be part of a person who's feeling disenfranchised by a family. That can be the Debbie or the Seth or the someone else who is in a rough spot with members of the family, but maybe would like to have a relationship with the niece or the nephew, or someone who we could potentially be close to. So if that might be you, it's worth investigating for yourself. Is my family loyalty so important that I shouldn't try to be accepting towards this person who is cut off from us? And that's, like I say, it's adjacent to this topic, but it's about deciding for yourself what your exclusive boundaries are, but also what your inclusive boundaries are.
Yeah, and that's going to be different for different people in different situations. I definitely took the scorched earth path because my concern was that if I did talk to cousin so-and-so, they're going to talk to my bio mother or father or somebody else, and they're gonna because I wanted to just not even exist anymore, and so I didn't even want to be a topic of conversation, positive or negative. And I found that there were only like 2 people in my family, relatives, that I trusted to not talk about me to the people who I didn't want to have contact with, and I didn't trust anybody else. And so I ended up cutting off generations of people, which I'm fine with. That's my deliberate choice. That's not an accident. And if these people ever did reach out to me and say, hey, I know you had conflict with person X and person Y, can we be in touch? I would say no. And I would understand them asking. There's only so mad I could be at that, but I would understand them asking, and I would say no, and I would, find a way to respond to that and make sure that door is closed. But again, that's my choice, because I could just as easily say, oh, that's the niece of the person I don't like, or the grandchild, or the cousin, maybe I could try to connect with them. And so everybody's got to pick their own path.
Exactly. I mean, I love, full circle, kind of at the top of the hour, you were saying that you're celebrating 19 years of no contact with biological nuclear family.
Sure.
And I think that's the right word. I think if we can get to a place where we see sticking to our boundaries to protect ourselves as cause for celebration, I think that's the right idea. It's very easy, especially early on, for people to feel. Now, in your case, it was immediately a sense of relief. For a lot of people, it's conflicted. It's not
Sure.
a clear-cut situation. But that would be my hope, is that for people who decide, and again, we're speaking largely this hour about sort of absolutes, about setting a hard boundary and drawing a no-contact rule. There are plenty of people out there who are doing the really hard, finicky, complicated, always changing work of trying to renegotiate and reestablish how I have contact with each member of my extended or nuclear family, or group of friends. Again, this is sometimes not about blood relations. It's people in my world. It's hard stuff. And I would say, if you're comfortable with it and it's working for you and it's effective, fantastic. And if it's not, there is absolutely nothing wrong with, and in fact, highly encouraged to read one of the many good books on setting boundaries. Talk to someone that you trust at this in their own life. Realize you're only going to get their one perspective on it, but it gives you some guidance. And or talk to a therapist, talk to a certified life coach, talk to someone who is able to give you some kind of sounding board feedback about your specific situation, give you a reality check of, does this make any sense? Am I doing this right? That can really go a long way towards helping you to make choices that are going to be healthy for you in the long run, and helping you to stick to those and ultimately celebrate them.
Yeah, so many great points there, and knowing that I want to wrap up soon, you and I made a list of some common terms, that we would like to define for people, because sometimes people feel like, why does my uncle always do this? Or why, when I go to that family dinner, do people say these racist things? They know I'm not a racist. They know I'm going to fight back, or I'm going to walk away, and then I leave the family dinner, and now my phone is blowing up with people saying I ruined Christmas. There are names that we can give these behaviors so that people understand these are behaviors with names. You're not alone. You can look this stuff up and see if it applies to you. So the going through the list that you and I made, I want to read through it, and I'll read each thing, and you can give us some definitions or maybe examples. So one of them is appeal to authority.
Yeah. So this is one of a number of logical fallacies that can come up in conversations with people, where the person is essentially, rather than giving you actual evidence to support their position, they're just simply saying, this authority figure said so. And that's good enough for me. God wants this. This is what my political party says. This is what
the president says.
Doctor influencer person says. Right. That's the idea, is that these people basically put out the idea that I'm going to tell you this is so because someone else said that this is so. And so that's the basics of an appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy, because just because someone else had an opinion and that person is in high regard doesn't actually mean that it's so.
Excellent. Thank you. The next one is called, it's an acronym, and it's called DARVO.
Yeah, DARVO's been around for a while, and it's an acronym for the D and the A are deny and attack. The RVO are reverse victim and offender. We may have actually talked a little bit about one of these, or a couple of these, back when we talked about codependents and about narcissism and gaslighting, which we'll talk about in a second. DARVO is basically a standard operating procedure for someone with a narcissistic personality structure, where, again, as I mentioned earlier, they can't tolerate someone coming at them, but they're very comfortable coming at someone else. And so they'll say something to someone, or they'll do something to someone, or there'll be a long-standing pattern towards someone. And the minute that person responds, often just to defend themselves, the person becomes, they start clutching at pearls and saying, oh my gosh, why are you coming at me? We see this a lot in some high-profile situations these days with CEOs and politicians and people who are pretty clearly narcissistic, where they will take someone they've been victimizing, and that person speaks up for themselves, and they will immediately say, oh my gosh, why are you attacking me? So that's essentially the concept of DARVO.
Yeah, so like an example might be, you're at the family dinner, Uncle Jim says something awfully racist. You decide to speak up and say something, and now Uncle Jim is saying, how dare you attack me? And so now he's the victim, you're the problem, you're the offender, and that's the O in DARVO. So these are probably some techniques people will be familiar with, but definitely taking the difficult person and having them play that victim.
And DARVO is sort of gaslighting adjacent, if I can sort of jump to that one.
Yeah, let's jump into gaslighting.
A term that's, I mean, at this point, it's sort of a household word. It's based on the classic old film Gaslight. Definitely want to stream it. It's great. And the basic idea is that we're forcing someone to, or trying to manipulate someone into questioning their own reality. It's basically telling someone that's not what happened, that's not what I said. In cases of abuse, in cases of someone who's trying to attack someone in some way, an immediate denial. I didn't do that. I didn't say that. You're making this up. And getting the person not just to deny it, but to start questioning their own experience, to start asking, well, did I just read that wrong? Did I interpret that wrong? Did I overreact to that?
Maybe I'm not remembering it right.
Right. And that's kind of very similar to the concept of DARVO, where you're starting to change the person's perspective on it, change everyone else's perspective on it just by brute force, essentially force of will.
Yeah, and of course, gaslighting was something we've talked about before on this channel. The idea where the person tries to make it look like you're just not, you didn't understand what I said. You're too sensitive. You can't take a joke. It's somehow suddenly about you. And I think that's a cousin of a term that I just learned from Claude the other day. Did you know this one? Schrodinger's asshole? I did not know this one.
Until you mentioned it to me, I had never heard it, and I will be using it every day from now on. But I love it. The idea that I put something out there. Every single one of us have seen this in online interactions, but probably in person as well.
Right.
Person puts something out there. They say, women should never have the right to vote. They should just keep their mouths shut. And the minute someone goes, "Oh my God, what are you, a Neanderthal? That's crazy," they'd be like, "Oh no, I'm just kidding." It's a reading the room to see, is it going to be accepted at face value, in which case I want to stick to my position, or is the room going to suddenly go hostile on me, in which case I'm going to turn it into a joke? And so Schrodinger's asshole, depending on how people respond to me, is going to determine how I choose to play this out. Do I want to stick to my incredibly sort of inappropriate and socially tone deaf position, or am I going to try to flip it and say, no, I'm only joking. I'm just messing around. It's a great term. It's going to be part of my everyday use now.
Yeah, that was special. I would definitely also want to talk about tone policing. I think that's something many people have been on the crappy end of, and I think especially women, because as soon as we say, someone says, like you said, women shouldn't have the right to vote, and then I say, well, I don't agree with that. And then I find people say like, "Oh God, you sound so emotional. You sound so harsh." Like all of a sudden they're focusing on what they believe, true or false, is the tone of what I've said, and no longer the substance of what we were talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, this is another logical fallacy. It's a type of ad hominem attack where you're not actually addressing the content of what's being said. You're addressing the literal tone of what's being said. And so it's kind of like, I can't tolerate. The example I can think of that's probably the most extreme is, you're in the middle of torturing someone and the person is screaming and you're like, "Can you keep it down, please?" You're basically saying to the person, I am, my comfort level is being impinged by your need to actually defend your right to be alive, or your right to speak your truth, or your right to your emotional safety. It's telling you to pipe down. It's telling you to shut up, to be quiet. I don't want to hear what you have to say. But instead of addressing it in any sort of logical way, it's basically saying, you're shrill, you're loud, you're overly emotional. It is a very guy thing. Guys have historically taken this as a position to tone police. To why can't you just keep it down? Why do you have to be so emotional? Certainly not true of every guy, and not true of every conversation. But it's unfortunately, there's a long-standing history of tone policing being a way of shutting down actual argument and actual discourse.
Yeah, thanks for that. I can certainly think of many examples from my own life of that. Let's jump on projection. I love the list that you made and the example you have here of when we project.
Yeah. So projection is kind of a really old concept. Unlike some of these, which are a little more contemporary, projection goes all the way back, like well over 100 years ago, to Sigmund Freud. Love him or hate him, he had some ideas that stick around, and this was certainly one of those. It's changed over the years. It's morphed slightly, but the basic idea is that we take something that's true of us internally, often something we're not even aware of, and we kind of hang it out there on someone else. So the example that you like that's listed here is, you're tearing the family apart, said by people creating a hostile environment. It's basically when you take something that you're saying or doing, and generally speaking, you don't even aware that you're saying or doing, and you note it in someone else, and you start sort of identifying it in them. It's a very universal concept. It's something that we all do. It's literally built into how humans operate. But that projection can sometimes be the source of a tremendous amount of hypocrisy in ourselves. And once you realize you're doing it, it can be a little embarrassing, quite frankly, because sometimes it's pretty obvious to everyone but yourself.
And we see it from some of the politicians or CEOs or malignant narcissists out there who make the headlines when they're guilty of a particular crime or act, but they're very busy saying, no, 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 don't look at me. This guy is out there doing that, and this guy's out there doing that, and, I'm the good one.
Right. One might argue that projection is kind of the fuel that makes Darvo run. The idea is that projection is a concept that's been around, again, for a very long time. Darvo is something that came around from the late 90s. And it's basically the idea that it's one specific instance or kind of manifestation of projection. It's a very particular flavor of projection that people who are more narcissistic, more self-absorbed, more egotistical tend to employ. But it's the same basic concept of I'm taking something that's in me, not aware that I'm doing it, or in some cases don't care that I'm doing it, hang it out on someone else. How Freud originated it was something entirely unconscious, something we weren't even aware that we're doing. And I think that's still largely true for most people for projection.
I wanted to throw another one out there, which is a term I hadn't heard, and this was one that Claude used with me the other day when we were making some of this list, and that was flying monkeys, which I understand is a Wizard of Oz reference. But Seth, tell us about the flying monkeys that probably many people ran into in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think we might have tossed this one out just along the way this hour. Flying monkeys are basically, it's not a clearly established psychological term. It's not something that some family therapist came up with. It's literally just a clear, obvious sort of metaphor for what happens. The idea that you can have people who are supporting someone who is more toxic, someone who's more narcissistic, someone who's more problematic. And so oftentimes these are those enablers. And it's part of the reason I put that little disclaimer out there, to kind of check yourself, because it's really easy for someone to think they're doing good, trying to keep the family together, trying to protect a loved one, something like that. And in order to do that, I'm going to reach out and deliver a message to Debbie who doesn't want to be contacted, right? I'm going to be that person who's going to reach out and try to, it's not that I'm trying to break a boundary. I'm just trying to keep the peace. I'm trying to pull people together. Maybe this is a misunderstanding that can be fixed. It's a lot of rationalization that someone does. And so they kind of swoop in and deliver a message or some kind of engagement attempt by the person who is attempting to be avoided or a boundary has been set with. And so this is just a classic example of enabling, where someone says, I'm not doing anything harmful. I'm just trying to bring people together. When in fact, what you're doing is attempting to weaken a boundary that someone set, oftentimes for a very good reason.
Yeah, so the flying monkeys, just to sum that one up, if you happen to walk out of a family dinner, your phone might blow up from all of the other people at the dinner. It might not even be the person you had some words with, but other people are, hey, you made dad mad, or now grandma's crying and you should come back and apologize. And so the flying monkeys are like all of the hench people who are trying to come in and manipulate the situation a bit.
Right. And again, to clarify, that's different than the person who's texting you saying, hey, are you okay?
Right.
Which is a very different kind of situation. If they legitimately want to know if you're okay, arguably that person's not a winged monkey. They're a concerned family member who might still be a loved one. But if they're coming in to deliver the message of you shouldn't have done that, that was a harmful thing to protect yourself, that's winged monkey territory.
Yeah, how come the people are always protecting the racist or the aggressor, and they're rarely concerned about why you're upset or you're leaving? We should refocus on the racist or the other person and care about their feelings but not yours. So much of this stuff just does not pass my standards for good behavior or even logic.
Yeah. I think a lot of times it's out of fear of being shunned by that person, fear of consequences, fear of now me being the one who's, the victim in the situation. I honestly think there's probably still more than a few people out there who will take a stand and say, hey, she needed to take a break, cool it, let her be, and actually be the one to protect the person who is choosing to invoke a boundary. But you're right. I mean, oftentimes the victim isn't going to see those things. They're going to see the people who are reaching out in a more sort of aggressive or adversarial way, unfortunately.
So thank you for staying a little bit late. We're running a little bit late today. Any other terms you wanted to define for people, and then we'll look at some closing thoughts.
I think on our list we hit most of it. I mean, the one thing that I'm just going to sort of note here is that it's really common, and this goes way beyond a 1 minute thing, but it's really common for things in relationships to happen in triangles as a shape. There's an old family therapy concept that two people in a relationship are inherently unstable. That it's very common for people to have sort of groups of three, and that third person who steps in oftentimes has good intentions, but can be part of the enabling process. That's kind of why the whole flying monkey thing happens. Absolutely true. This not my circus, not my monkeys. I love this. I've been using this forever. The fact of the matter is learning to take a step back and to say, I am not going to get involved in this. This is not my situation. I don't have a need to be involved in this. And if I get involved, it might make things worse or messy. As a psychologist, it's really easy for me to potentially get triangulated, to potentially get pulled in, or at least the attempt is made. And people would probably be aghast if they knew how often I choose to take a hard pass on that. And my feeling is it's not my circus, it's not my monkeys, it's not even my state or my town or my country. I don't have to be involved in this. If people choose to engage me, I will have my own boundaries and rule of engagement in terms of how I'm going to do it to make sure that I'm doing it in a way that's not harmful or enabling to people. But oftentimes my choice is not to involve myself in it because it's only going to make things messier. And when that's clear for yourself, you have no obligation to make that phone call to your uncle, cousin, sister, brother-in-law, mom, dad, whatever, because someone asked you to. You don't have to do that.
Right.
Or
You
if
don't
you
have
do
to be a
that,
flying monkey.
you don't have to be. And if you choose to do that, you can choose to do that under your own terms, where you're the one calling to say, hey, are you okay? I'm checking in. I just want you to know that I care about you. I know this is a really hard situation right now. I'm not going to ask you to do anything or to do anything differently. I respect where you're coming from on this. Great Aunt Debbie, I understand that you don't want to have a conversation with me. I just wanted to let you know I care and I wanted to reach out. Is probably something you're still going to say thanks but no thanks to, but it might not feel horrible to know that someone actually cared. And so you can reach out. You just have to be careful about how you choose to do it.
Right, exactly. And consider whatever boundaries that person may have expressed. Dr. Seth, endless thanks to you for being on the show again. Any closing words for people before I say a few?
It's always a pleasure. I'm going to hope that people are having a calm, healthy, peaceful holiday season for themselves, whatever you choose to celebrate or not celebrate. And I wish you guys abundance and peace in the new year.
Thank you, and back at you. And I just want to remind people to consider self-care, how do you recharge your batteries, and how can you put your own oxygen mask on first? Because the difficult people in your life might not be thinking, how can I take better care of Debbie right now? No, they're probably not thinking about that. So Debbie has to think about how to take better care of Debbie. So that's not selfish. That's just being kind to yourself and showing yourself some love. So I will play some of our outro music. And Seth, thank you again. And hope to see you next year on more topics. Thanks.
Always a pleasure. Can't wait.